Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And so in this lecture, we're going to be going through sex roles and subculture. So when we think about sex roles and we think about subcultures, we're really thinking about who are our gamers? Who are the people who play these video games? What external variables might spur video gameplay, might inspire video gameplay? And what can we learn from these different ways to kind of cut the audience apart, if you will? So many times we might say to ourselves, well, anybody can play a Nintendo game or everybody has access to Twitch. And while that might be true, there are certain variables that are predictive of consumer behavior, namely demographic information, including gender, including income as well, and including the generation that you might have been born into. And so there are a lot of factors here that can really play pivotal roles in the way that we understand video game audiences and in the way in which we kind of think about who these video game audiences may be, where they're going, where they're coming from, and what their interests might be. The first thing I want to talk about is social identity theory. Now, for me, I am a college sports fan and a complete college nut when it comes to basketball, football, and baseball. So I went to grad school at Syracuse University as well as University of Florida. So when I see these logos, they mean something to me. No, I don't come around with my student ID from Florida or Syracuse, but nevertheless, I'm affiliated with these schools. I have some sort of membership that I'll have the rest of my life. For some of you, it may be the school that you go to. For some of you, it might be the Twitch channel that you follow. For some of you, it could be the brands that you wear, right? Some of us may wear Express or Calvin Klein or Cole Haan or purchase items at Victoria's Secret, whatever it might be. We align ourselves with certain brands. Through these brands, we might create identities. And we've talked about this before, this idea of social identity theory. This is the part of the self that is identified with some sort of group. Now, again, we don't go around carrying cards. I identify as a nerd, but I don't have my card on me. Some of you might identify as techies. Some of you might identify as jocks or an athlete or nerds or whatever it may be. But we make these decisions on our own. We have a self-perception of ourselves that lends itself to identifying with other groups. This also falls in line with gender identity. So gender identity is another identity in which we think about our own self-concept. So people often conform to their cultural expectations about how their gender should act or dress or speak. We refer to these as sex roles. Now, market research is in an interesting time because traditionally we've measured people based around biological sex, male and female. And there still is quite a bit of predictiveness, if you will, in using these variables to explain variance in consumer behavior. But as we have more and more people comfortable with identifying as fluid, gender fluid, transgender, or part of the LGBTQ community, these measurements have been altered, for some market research firms. So with social identity theory, with gender identity, it's not just about what you're a part of. Remember, it's also what you're not. If I'm a nerd and an athlete, I'm also not a lot of other things. In fact, what we identify as pales into comparison with all of the things we're not. That's critical to note here when we're thinking about grouping video game players or any kind of audience for that matter. What the audience identifies as or with is small and specific compared to what they aren't, compared to what they don't subscribe to. When we think about gender identity versus sexual identity, we're also thinking about the kinds of goals that might be set here. So for one, especially for males, there are agentic goals. This idea of being self-assertive, being a master. Males are seen to be dominant, right? We see this with a lot of video games. Video games have males in leadership positions, shooting aliens, saving princesses, defeating monsters, conquering worlds, finding treasure, completing levels. Females tend to be more submissive. Females tend to have a back seat or to serve as a sidekick. And so when we think of video games like Super Metroid, which has Samus, which is a female lead who can shoot and who can kill and destroy aliens and alien ships. That was a very revolutionary game back in the 80s. Unfortunately, we still have it today in more updated installations. What we also have to think about here is communal goals, the affiliation and building harmonious relationships. This is something that females tend to pursue, or at least are told to pursue, for that matter. Females are meant to build. Females are meant to harmonize. Females are meant to cultivate and harness group and communal dynamics, which fits in quite well as being the head of the household, as being the parent that raises all the children, which is a very typical female stereotype, although it has eroded over time as females have been granted more rights and have illustrated greater interest in entering into the workforce and really having commanding careers in their given discipline. And so when we think about agentic goals and communal goals, this is the basis, ladies and gentlemen. This is the basis for how females and males determine who they want to be and what they want to be. And so when we get involved in sex-type traits, we're here kind of rooted in these preconceived notions of what these genders really should be. This is emblematic in a lot of the media that we consume, right? Aside from video games, we see this in television and movies and such. We've been fortunate with the last 15 years or so in which we've made really great strides in empowering women. Obviously, the work is not done yet, but we are moving along with Wonder Woman and a lot of other pieces of media in which we're showcasing powerful women. Veep is another show on HBO that comes to mind as well. But we also have reinforcement in the marketplace regarding gender. And so if you and I went to the mall, and if we visited stores, we can see images, we can see particular tools and presents and gifts and materials and possessions that are bent toward reinforcing gender stereotypes. So much so that if I have Diesel, I could have that brave tattoo, only the brave tattoo. If I have Diesel, I'm one step closer to being a macho kind of dude, or just having a tattoo for that matter, right? Really showing off my masculinity, really demonstrating that. And if you can't make out what that is, Diesel is a kind of a cologne, and that is a fist, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't get more aggressive with cologne than a fist facing you as you are putting on cologne, which is an otherwise innocuous and low aggression activity. And so Diesel is making it quite clear that it is aggressive. And it's also in black, which illustrates either power or royalty. The color black can also infer or present luxury and a whole host of other things. We have here to the right of the screen Ragazza. This is a female perfume. You can see it's curvaceous like a woman, and you can see this in a lot of bottles of perfume. In fact, in which bottles are curved or they appear to be a bit more sensual. And so we can see that, there's pressure here for genders to, subscribe to either one. Obviously, men are going to get Diesel, and, some women have worn men's cologne, and some men may choose to wear women's perfume. Both have happened, but we can see here how binary, how dichotomous both bottles are here. I mean, they are so different in what they're presenting. You know, the pink obviously is female, black is power and it's royalty and it's richness, and men are the breadwinners here, and so of course the male cologne is in black. And so we can see a lot of things here, and we can pull a lot of things here. And so, you know, it's good to note that when we think about certain video games like Call of Duty, if we think about certain video games like Cooking Mama, you know, some of these video games that we play have outwardly blatant signage regarding which gender it's appropriate for. And some games will have, you know, different avatars that are gender fluid, or that you can select your own avatar. But this is still something that is few and far between. So if we look at the academic literature on sex and consumer products, most products are believed to have a gender identity. So this is kind of step one when we're thinking about Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PS4, and we're even thinking about Google Stadia. You know, we want to think about how masculine or how feminine are these products? This is a strange thing to really ask because it's a video game console. And so if it's a video game console, it means it's not a human being or an animal. And so for that matter, then, it should be gender neutral, right? Like other products, like my desk, like my computer. But if we look closely at a lot of different products tend to be a bit gender specific. If you don't believe me, look at your Febreze in your dorm or room, and all of you should have a Febreze. The Febreze, if you look at it carefully, is kind of feminine in the way that it's curved. The colors, mine is pink and blue. It has flowers on it. You know, we take for granted all the time the products we use are just meant for certain uses and nothing more. But if we look carefully at certain products, we can see very, very quickly it's incredible that certain products really are built to appeal to certain genders or to appeal to a certain gender-specific activity. If we look at an Xbox controller, if we look at a Nintendo controller, if we look at a PS4 controller, I don't know really if that particular controller is meant for males or females, but it's an interesting conversation nonetheless. A product's gender may be impacted by whether the spokesperson is male or female here. And so this is something else to consider. This has been found to be true in other countries abroad, as in Greece and in Turkey for that matter as well. Male sex roles. What we know to be male sex roles, and what we know that a lot of video game characters have. So we have, video game avatars here that are from many, many different walks of life. So at the bottom, we have Street Fighter here, and we have Ryu and Ken. And then above, we have Duke Nukem. And so if we see here the kinds of male sex roles here, we're thinking about tough, aggressive, muscular, sports, breadwinner, rebel, man of action, right? These are really machismo men that fear nothing, that can dominate, that can quickly push and push and push the envelope, and can be protectors, and can be heroic, and are capable, and are competent, and can build you a house and take care of you, right? We think of all these roles that are quickly ascribed to males. We can see this in the male disposition, we can see it in the male lens, and this is something that video games really haven't strayed away from for quite some time. This really has been the way in which video games have functioned in order to communicate with their stakeholders, which are video game players. Differently, if we look at female video game players, we have Tifa from Final Fantasy VII here. We can see that a lot of women are hypersexualized here. And we can see that women are submissive, nurturing, domestic, dependent, sexy, and maternal. And so with this submissiveness, women acquiesce, they yield to the whims of men. They're meant to take care of men. They're meant to serve men. They're meant to serve as a sidekick to men. Men make the decisions. Women simply follow and are often not heard. Women also typically take on a nurturing mechanism here, right? Women are meant to cultivate, to grow, to foster, to raise, if you will. And this falls into being domestic. It falls into being dependent. It also falls into being sexy, right? Women are available for sex. They're available for sexual conquering for males. They're available for sexual intercourse. And then we also have this maternal quality as well. And a lot of these roles are obviously unfair and limiting for females. And certainly men can take on these roles, and certainly females can take on these roles as well. Women can be tough, aggressive, muscular, engaged in sports. They can be breadwinners, they can be rebels, they can be women of action, and they can be competent, and they can lead. But the question is, what do we give video game characters, and what are we reinforcing to video game audiences? What are we telling video game audiences when we have these roles? Now, it's not all bad here, as there is some logic behind why these roles may exist. These roles exist in gaming because they are the most familiar. You don't have to explain these gentlemen. Nothing is to be said here, right? If you have seen enough media content, you can quickly surmise, oh, these are the heroes. They're huge, they're muscular, they're tough, they look strong. I know exactly what I'm going to be doing with them. I know exactly what the plot is going to be. I don't really have to waste any time figuring out things. Oh, these women are really, really good looking. They're sexy. It's possible that one of these females will probably be my love interest. I might have to save them. I'm probably going to have to protect them. Great, good. Now, I did that within about a minute without playing the game. So it makes sense for a lot of writers to kind of reinforce these stereotypes. It makes sense to write in these stereotypes for expediency. Now, I'm not excusing this by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm trying to help you understand why we see these reinforced stereotypes all the time. For some writers, they see it as expedient. They see it as easy. They see it as familiar to audiences. Nonetheless, they are very limiting, and they perpetuate stereotypes. That's absolutely a given with this conversation. We also have gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender characters. And so, and I've seen LGBTQ, GLBT, and so this is an acronym that was found in a textbook, so I'm sticking with this. So, believe it or not, this is one of the few GLBT characters. This is Birdo from the Nintendo company. And so Birdo has been featured in a bunch of things across Mario video games, and he was described as being male but identifying as a female and having a bow on his or her head, for that matter. And so Birdo is just one of those characters that really had a lot of potential in pushing GLBT or LGBTQ membership in gaming, but it just never took off. But the GLBT community really should be targeted more by the video game developing community. They are 12 times more likely to hold professional jobs. They are twice as likely to own a vacation home, and they're 8 times more likely to own a notebook. And so they are professional, they are wealthy, and they are organized and thoughtful, typically. And I recognize that these are generalizations, but this is backed by market research. And so this particular consumer segment, GLBT community, have a lot of disposable income. If video game developers are seeking to expand, not only should they expand the roles for women in video games, but they probably should consider identifying GLBT characters. It might very well be in their best interest, not only just from a social perspective, which we can all agree on is good and should be pushed, but also from a financial perspective as well. Ethnic subculture. So video games do feature ethnic characters. When we think about ethnic characters in video games, it's really, really important to think about how they might be perceived, how they might be perceived by audiences, but also how they're depicted by particular video game companies as well. And so if we think about Grand Theft Auto, for instance, we can think about Carl Johnson, CJ. And so he was in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, African American figure. And so, he was somebody who was a gangster, but was also able to get involved in business ventures. And it wasn't always gang related. And so there are these issues in which, we're glad to have ethnic representation in gaming, but we want to be sure that the ethnic representation in gaming is accurate and that it's positive and that it pushes the story along. But again, we fall victim to old tropes, to old ideas, and to old stereotypes. It's really, really easy for me to make a video game about an African American youth who's in and out of jail. I mean, who hasn't seen an African American in film or television who's been arrested and who's been in jail? Now, by no means am I excusing this, but again, I'm merely pointing out why we see this constantly. And these are negative stereotypes. That's very, very easy to say, and we can all agree on that. But we do see this perpetuated again because it's a story that fans are familiar with, it's easier to explain, and it's easier to break down. That being said, there have been movements to positively depict minorities, in particular in sports games. I really do think that having leagues in which you have, African Americans that make up the majority of the league, especially in the NBA, are opportunities in which to just show the raw athleticism, leadership, intelligence, and teamwork that African Americans are capable of, just like every other race and ethnicity. And so I think sports games have done a pretty good job in illustrating this, in illustrating that we can show positive depictions of different ethnicities. There is the Final Fantasy VII remake that is coming out within the next month, I believe, from this recording, in which we have Jax in Final Fantasy VII, who is a very large and tough African American who has a machine gun for one of his hands, but is very competent, is very loyal, is intelligent, is quick. And so there are a lot of good, positive features about him. So we want to think about high context culture and low context culture here. High context culture, these are group members who tend to be tightly knit, and they infer meanings that go beyond the spoken word. We have low context culture. These are people who are more literal. Many minority cultures tend to be high context and have strong oral traditions, so consumers are sensitive to nuances in advertisements and go beyond the message copies. So this is particularly true for Hispanic families. Now, the family that I have here in this PowerPoint, I was searching for a good photo of a Hispanic family. This manifested in a Google search. I'm making the assumption they are Hispanic. There's certainly evidence to believe that they very well may be, based on their look. But in particular, Hispanic audiences are remarkably brand loyal. Please note this. In fact, they are so difficult to crack from an advertising and public relations standpoint. You'll often find in firms that there are Hispanic research teams, just primarily focused on Hispanic audiences. And Hispanic audiences are remarkably loyal to brands, be it sports brands, be it food brands, be it show brands, be it, telenovelas, soap operas and things like that. Hispanics are remarkably brand loyal. And so if you can create a video game that really does speak to Hispanic culture, or even more specifically Mexican culture or Brazilian culture, or certain portions of the Hispanic or greater Hispanic community, you really will make inroads in a really positive way with the audience. religious subcultures. We do have religion in gaming. We have religion in Assassin's Creed, for instance. We have a religion in God of War. We have religion in a lot of different video games. And sometimes they're religions, such as Buddhism or Christianity, but they can also be just a religion, right? Just a religion. And so that may be made up for the sake of the game. And so religion is powerful because it's really useful to bring everyone together. It's really useful to be able to bring together different people around some sort of image, around some sort of deity. And so in religious subcultures, Christianity, that cross is a brand. Not to commercialize religion, but of course, any kind of religious logo is a call, right? I grew up Catholic myself, and my family now identifies as Christian, and so, any kind of cross in a video game will grab my attention. And we know in a lot of Dracula-based media, be it television shows or be it video games, such as Castlevania, for instance, which has been a TV series and which has been a video game, crosses are used everywhere. And we know crosses can be used as weapons to, kill monsters and kill zombies and things like that. And so, if there's a high brand reliance in a region, consumers are less likely to participate in organized religion. And this is really fascinating. Religions in a light can serve as brands and can really serve as just a kind of marketplace of ideas, if you will. Are you a Buddhist? Are you do you believe in Hinduism? Do you believe in Christianity? Are you Jewish? Whatever other religion you might subscribe to, those are all brands. And so if we really think about it, if we live in places where there, is a high push for wearing certain brands, if we go into New York City, maybe not right now given the coronavirus that's occurring, but if we went to New York City in a few months, brands are everywhere. I mean, there is St. Patrick's Church, but brands are everywhere. And so from that, really then, there may not be a need to be religious because we worship brands, right? We subscribe to Nike or we subscribe to Under Armour. And so brands are a very funny thing. They are meant to help us come together as one, over some sort of shared identification, over some sort of shared codified body of laws about how we should live or how we should feel or how we should think. Age cohorts. Now we're going to shift into different ages. If we're thinking about who are people and who is out there to play video games, who is out there that we can talk to, who is out there that we can connect to. Age cohorts are very, very important because we always have to think about who is our audience now, where are they going, and also where are they coming from. So we get audiences when they turn a certain age. We have them for a certain time frame, and then we let them go. And that's really the way to think about audiences, be it in television, be it in film, be it in video games. We let people go all the time. If we think about the latest Batman franchise, it's going to be reignited in, I believe, another year with Robert Pattinson as the lead. Christian Bale began as Batman in 2005, and then before then we had a few Batmans, and then before then we had Michael Keaton. And so if we think about it, over time, people have their own perception of who Batman is. Christian Bale's Batman, the first Batman in that installation, came out in 2005. I was 18 years old. And so by that point, I probably already had my own perception of who Batman is. For you guys, especially students listening now, Christian Bale is Batman. And I am sure that many of you could care less about the Michael Keaton version of Batman, although the Michael Keaton version resonates with me greatly. This is not unfounded in video games. The way that Super Mario is construed and looks and sounds and runs and jumps and all of those things is very different from the Super Mario that I love and know. That goes with Mickey Mouse, that goes with a lot of other things. When we think about how entertainment is consumed and engaged, every generation that comes through has a different perception that has been informed by different kinds of engagement, by technology induced engagement, by content induced engagement. And so when we're looking at these markets, the first is children. Children are the primary market. Children spend much on their own needs and wants. And so primary markets tend to be children focused. Children will tell their parents what they want, what they need. Children aren't necessarily worried about their parents up until maybe 10 years old, unless you have a really self-aware 8-year-old in your home. And so children are largely really interested in themselves, right? We grow up kind of selfish, then we might think about our brothers and sisters, then we might get around to thinking about our parents. We also have an influence market. An influence market works to influence product selections. It works to influence children. Now, 20, 30 years ago, as that pains me to say that, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, there was something called Saturday morning cartoons. In fact, it started in the late 70s, but really crystallized in the late 80s into the early 90s, and even into the mid 90s for that matter. And so influence markets here included cartoons that were meant to inspire kids to buy the action figures. And so influence marketing is different today, right? Children's television is different today. How children find out about video games is different today. Children find out about video games through Twitter, through Snapchat, through Twitch, through YouTube. There are a whole host of different ways in which children find out about different video games. So the influence market has shifted here to become more interactive and to really go find children who are interested in gaming at an early age and then attempt to get them hooked, so to speak. And then we have future markets. Now, future markets are really interesting if we go back to 2000. So, the first modern video game generation, right after the disintegration or the brief disintegration of the video game industry in 1983, was about 1985. And so, I was born a few years after. By 2000, I was 13. If we go here, we have an issue. People are growing up. This is the first time in which we have modern video game players growing up. What do we do in 2000? We can't keep making childish games. If we do, we're really losing out in the marketplace. And frankly, rated R movies have become a bit more lax. More children, more teenagers are seeing rated R stuff. You can kind of curse on television by this point. Certain words, of course, but that was starting to change. Could we push the envelope in gaming? And is there an appetite for that? Well, there very well might be. Because we know that those children who are playing Super Mario will be watching violent movies when they're 17 and 20 and 22. Why wouldn't they want to play violent video games? After all, they're already playing Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. So the future market at that point really came about to look at, well, it may very well be possible that we can start getting more adult-themed video games into the marketplace, and it will work. It will satiate an unmet demand. And it did. And really, since the early 2000s, adult video games have taken off. They're often the most popular, along with casual games. And so future markets are really important to understand. You always want to think about where are your children going if you are a children's marketer, or where are your teenagers going if you're a teenage marketer, or where are your young adults going if you're a young adult marketer. Again, you always want to think about where are your consumers coming from, how long do you have them, and where are they going. Gen Y. So these are the millennials, born 1986 to 2002. I've seen different attributes, ascribed to them. I've seen different years in which millennials were born in, but really millennials are born between 1986. I've seen 1984 to 2000. I tend to agree with that one. I don't think millennials are really people who have grown up solely with the internet. That's kind of a major shift in generations. I can still remember not having the internet. I can still remember watching appointment viewing television and not having a smartphone, and I remember beepers and things like that. And so I do think that that's a really strong demarcation for the difference between Gen Y and Gen Z. Attributes of Gen Y, Generation Y is very interested in feeling connected to others. They prefer to hold on to traditions that are related to their parents. They look for honesty. They look for authenticity. They look to be entertained. And I think you're seeing that with the latest shift in Generation Y. Millennials will be 40 years old. The oldest will be 40 years old in a few years. And in a few years, all millennials will have graduated from college. And so it's important to really think about this particular generation as it gains more disposable income and as it becomes more interested in things like gaming and in things like owning a video game console. Gen X. Generation X should be, I imagine, the range in which your parents were born. My parents were baby boomers, but I imagine your parents are Gen X. Gen X really is responsible for a shift in the workplace and innovative products such as Google, YouTube, and Amazon. All of that really comes from Gen Xers, really questioning authority, really thinking about what good could be done for the world and how can we connect people, and also thinking about how can we be progressive and move forward in technology and in innovation as well. And so as we're thinking about this, these generations are incredibly important to realize and to recognize and to know. But to better understand them, we also have to think about attributes for each of these generations, like income, social class, and luxury, and what they strive to be, and what people strive to be in each of these categories. So if we're thinking about discretionary income deals with the money available, to a household. That's, over and above what might constitute a comfortable standard of living. Can we afford video game consoles in the future? Video game consoles are about $500 a piece, and they're usually good for a presidential election cycle or two, right? You probably would play a video game console for at least 4 years. You might stretch it out to 8, but after that, it tends to become antiquated and old pretty quickly. And there's often a lot of pressure to be up to date to, go to the next console, especially since a lot of consoles now are not backwards compatible. There's kind of been a back and forth among video game console companies about whether or not to be. Although if you have an online subscription, you're able to play old video games pretty easily. There are also people who are spendthrifts, people who may not be interested in purchasing the latest and greatest console. So we've seen a really, really great expansion in the nostalgia video game marketplace, because nostalgia video game consoles often might be $100, $150. And so if we look at the NES Classic Edition, for instance, we can see that a lot of these video games, consoles, might be anywhere from $90 to $120 to $140, right? They're not as expensive as the other consoles, and really they're novelty items, but they also help brand managers manage the brand. Nintendo can still play upon its nostalgic appeal to its audiences while still creating new, engaging video game consoles. And it's done this. If we think about the Nintendo Wii, that formed its own blue marketplace, right? It employed the blue ocean strategy in which it created its own marketplace that really other video game consoles couldn't compete in. The Nintendo Wii was the only successful video game to date that employed very well motion capture controllers, being people. People were the motion capturing controllers. And so people's motions could be captured by the console. We also have seen this with Nintendo Wii, and we've seen this with Nintendo Switch. And so for spendthrifts, for people who may have their confidence waver or waffle over a particular console, Nintendo's done a really good job in setting tiers for its own consoles. I really can't say the same for Microsoft or Sony at this point. Materialism and economic conditions. So materialism is a really interesting perspective that we have in this time in which it seems like everybody is trying to cut down on the amount of things that we own, trying to cut down on the amount of space that we might occupy. And so this tiny house movement, tiny living movement, obviously we've just gotten out of a recession, and unfortunately we might be headed for one as well right now. Materialism and economic conditions are important to recognize here. Hedonic adaptation is important here. And this is something that a lot of people, I think, have struggled, and we've seen documentaries come out just from a social perspective here, in really thinking about how we're living and thinking about how much we need. And so hedonic adaptation deals with this idea of, to maintain a fairly stable level of happiness, we tend to become used to changes, big or small, wonderful or terrible. Over time, the rush from a major purchase will dissipate. And this is important to note, right? When we think about, if I could just get a new car, if I could just get a new apartment or a new condo or new clothes or video game console, I'll be happy, I'll be thrilled. But it doesn't happen. We're still left kind of empty. Video game consoles have been taking up space in our living rooms for quite some time. We think about materialism and we think about economic conditions. Does anybody here really need a Xbox One or a PS4? Is it possible just to play the video game on your PS3? In some cases, sure. In other cases, not really. You want that updated graphical image. The PS3 will eventually be discontinued. Google Stadia fights against a lot of this because Google Stadia allows you to purchase a video game only once and to be able to carry it with you along. And so when we think about materialism and economic conditions, this is something that millennials are very, very sensitive to. Having graduated or having worked through a recession and seemingly headed toward another one, millennials are spendthrifts. Millennials do not like spending money quite as much as previous generations, and they tend to have less brand loyalty toward products and services, toward branded products and services, than older generations have. Social classes. We really do have to think about social classes and think about who is playing my video game. Who do I want? Is the Xbox One a luxury video game console brand? It's sleek. If we watch some of the commercials, it is less about playing the video game and really all about a self-contained Pandora's box of entertainment possibilities. Both passive and interactive. Now, the PS4 can do the same thing, but this really isn't underscored as much in the PS4 commercials. If we think about social classes, we're thinking about a sort of mating. We're thinking about homogamy. We're thinking about people who marry people who are similar to them. I myself believe that I am well educated. I'm currently dating a woman who is also terribly well educated and has also gone to grad school. Probably wouldn't shock many of you. I suspect many of you are dating people who are attending college and maybe are from the same state that you're from, or maybe graduated from the same high school, or maybe like the same sports as you do. Homogamy is this notion of assortative mating, that we find people that we have things in common with, that we have similar backgrounds. This is the backbone of any kind of relationship, whether it be platonic or romantic. And so we also have to think about then the kind of relationship we're going to build, we're going to ignite, we're going to brand between video game players and consoles. What kind of relationship can people have with an Xbox One? Or really with the Xbox brand for that matter? What about Nintendo? That's tricky. We all grow up, but those of us who have children might revisit the Nintendo brand one day. When we think about assortative mating, we're thinking about who we want to partner with, who we want to be with. Additionally, this gives you information when you're conducting survey research or market research regarding who's playing games. If African American husbands tend to play Grand Theft Auto or NBA 2K or Visage or Cooking Mama, whatever it might be, it might very well be that African American wives of these African American husbands are also game players. And so it's important to think about how people might be mating, because this is another avenue for which you can understand your audiences better. There's also social stratification here, creation of artificial divisions. Not all minorities get to go to university. Not all Caucasians get to go to university. There are socioeconomic barriers regarding in what family are you born in what part of the country, how good is your school system, how much drive do you have. All of these factors play into social stratification. If you are born into a wealthy family, or if you're born near a city, or if you're born in a bustling part of the country, chances are you're probably going to go to university. You're probably going to receive an excellent education too. So if we think about that from an education perspective, then this becomes a really important variable, because it often can predict income, it can predict the kind of media people engage in, the kind of media people use. So education is a very important stratification to consider here. We also have social stratification from real estate laws, from keeping certain minorities in certain areas of the country and making it difficult for particular minorities to purchase houses, which is an unfortunate reality. And so we have all of these artificial barriers that go against our customers all the time, and they're unfortunate, but they do prevent certain people from experiencing certain things. Not everybody can afford to buy an Xbox One or PS4 or Nintendo. And as video game consoles get more and more expensive and try to shorten their windows a bit so that they can release more consoles, it's important to be cognizant that not everyone is able to be plugged into gaming, and that there might be some underserved customers out there. Status and status hierarchy are important monikers here to be mindful of. Status hierarchy, this is the notion that some people are just better off than others. They have more authority of power. Other people may respect them. Some other people may say, oh, this guy, this girl is doing so well in life. And with status hierarchy, we're also thinking about social mobility. Can people go from being impoverished to middle class to high income? And with the video game market research industry, it's important to know why customers are coming to your video game and really where they're coming from. Do you have a lot of impoverished gamers? Should it matter? Should it not matter? Should you offer your video game app at $2.99 in an impoverished area in Florida and $3.99 in Manhattan, New York? Does it matter? Should prices vary? Should video game players' avatars vary from place to place? These are really, really interesting questions that a lot of people have as video games become more global and they become more widely played. Luxury. Luxury is not needed. This is why the luxury marketplace sometimes vacillates during a recession. Although many of its wealthy patrons are often shielded or somewhat insulated from recessions, and so they may not feel the pressure or pain associated with a recession. So luxury is functional. These customers use their money to buy things that will last and have enduring value. This is a hallmark of any kind of luxury good. Luxury goods usually do not break, do not bust. They're meant to be durable. And a lot of video game consoles are very durable. And I think that's why Xbox One went down the luxury avenue that it did, because one aspect of the Xbox One console is that it works exceptionally well. It's sleek, it's modern, it's sophisticated, but it endures. And it has many, many different uses. And so it is a sophisticated machine in many respects and should be treated as such by its patrons. Luxury is a reward. So these customers tend to be younger than the first group, but older than the third group here. So they tend to be younger adults, usually in their 20s and 30s. They use luxury goods to say, the desire to be successful and to demonstrate their success to others motivates these consumers to purchase conspicuous luxury items. I am sure you have a friend who has a brand new car, a brand new dress, a brand new bottle of perfume or cologne, a brand new smartphone or a brand new smart TV or a brand new couch. And these are conspicuous products and services, to be sure. And they are necessary in kind of social peacocking, if you will, right? Demonstrating that I have more than you, or demonstrating that I have all these consoles, right? If we think about video games in relation to luxury, it's a luxury to have more than one video game console. I should think so. I think it's still a luxury to have one, given how expensive they are. But nevertheless, it is a luxury to be able to have a video game console or even have access to one. So luxury is treated as a reward here for kind of the young adults, kind of the middle generation, if you will. Luxury is an indulgence. This group is the smallest of the three. It tends to include younger consumers and slightly more males than the other two groups. To these consumers, the purpose of owning luxury is to be extremely lavish and self-indulgent. And so luxury is functional, could be something that may very well apply to a lot of luxury goods. And so, for instance, one example that comes to mind is women tend to be cognizant of different shoes and different purse bags and things like that. And so some women collect bags. I know that my sister has quite a few herself, but those purchases tend to be functional, right? They tend to last long. Luxury as an indulgence could be women or men going after chocolate, right? And luxury as a reward could be, maybe getting that job promotion and then purchasing that car. And, men may also make luxury functional purchases with the amount of colognes that we collect, or, purchasing another car, or purchasing another watch. I know a lot of men tend to collect watches as well. And so luxury is a very funny thing. It's kind of a way in which to accrue awards as adults, right? We don't go to school anymore. We don't get A's anymore. We get paid. We go to our jobs. We do very, very well. And so if we're looking for rewards, we have to give ourselves rewards, because our parents are very much likely not going to be giving us rewards as much anymore. This leads to being cosmopolitan. It leads to this idea of having a cosmopolitan taste, of being worldly, of being global. Are you traveling? Have you traveled? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? We know that a lot of video games are also global. And we know that games, once again, like Assassin's Creed, take place in a bunch of different worlds. And we also know that a lot of video games are authentic and will take place in certain portions of the world, depending upon what the video game is focused on. And so it's important when we're thinking about being cosmopolitan is where have people been? Right? We can have a pandemic or a war happening in New York City. Not everybody's been there, but enough video game players are familiar with it to be okay with it. The tenets of being cosmopolitan is, being well traveled, being educated, being well read, right? It's not enough to have a college degree, ladies and gentlemen. Please keep reading after you walk across the stage and get your diploma. All of these things kind of come together as a way of creating cosmopolitanism, if you will. I am from New York, the suburbs of New York City. I tend to see myself as somewhat cosmopolitan for that reason. And many of you are from California, Los Angeles, Houston, Miami, other places as well. You may view yourself as cosmopolitan. There is something called affluenza. This is a term that has been made popular recently. And affluenza deals with this notion of unhappiness and unfulfillment in consuming material goods. And so again, we face this when we think about purchasing a new video game console. We want to think to ourselves, is this really going to create happiness? What does this do for us? There have been a few studies in market research and in decision making, consumer decision making, that have found that there's a threshold for consumers regarding happiness. Nationally, it's about $75,000 per year as an annual income. So if you're making $50,000, yes, more happiness can be accrued. If you were making $75,000, I suspect in the tri-state area it might be 100, 110, just given how expensive it is around here. But after a certain point, money doesn't mean anything. It means less and less to people. There's less and less happiness. This has been demonstrated over and over again. And so I think it's crucial to recognize that affluenza is a thing, that we can find richness in other activities. And so again, that falls in line with gaming though, right? I mean, if we have a video game console, if we download a video game app, we can find a lot of happiness in maybe just a cheap, simple game, right? Or if we have a video game console, we play the same video games over and over, which become more and more cheap, right? If you spend $60, you play the video game once, that's an expensive video game. But if you've logged in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hours, 60 hours in a $60 game isn't so bad. It's about $1 an hour. And so that's cheaper than going to the movie theater to watch a movie. And so it is possible to pull out happiness and joy, but I think we need to be circumspect and careful in what kinds of video games we invest in and what kind of happiness we think we're going to be getting out of it. And what I have down here is the affect behavioral cognition model, ABC. And we've looked at this before. We looked at this a few weeks ago. Affect being our attitude, influencing our behavior, and then influencing our cognition as well is important to consider. All of this is to say that we all fight to be sophisticated, those of us who care to be at least. And so there's a lot of pressure for a lot of people to rise, right? We look for that upward mobility. Some of us may be obsessed with being more sophisticated, more intelligent, more well-read, if you will. So this falls in line with social class in the United States. So these classifications, we might have upper middle class, upper lower class, lower class, lower middle, lower upper. These are just ways in which to look at class in the United States. And what does it mean to be in the middle? What does it mean to be high? What does it mean to be low? And then really thinking about, how does this impact video game consumers? Some video game consumers will not be able to afford the next Xbox console or the PS4 console. What does this do for their social image if they can't play with their friends? Does this influence how they perceive themselves? Does this shake them out of a hobby or a social standing or a social group? When we think about social mobility, luxury goods, entertainment goods come along with it. And so this can really impact the way in which some people are engaged with sophisticated media and others are not. What do people say to you if you have an old or retro video game console? Do people care? Now, gamers tend to be more open minded, and gamers tend to find quite a bit of use in retro games and old games and are happily eager to revisit retro games. But for many, they invest in high tech quality stuff. And so, even in video gameplay, we can see that there's a bit of a hierarchy with what people are willing to invest in. Social class around the world. We can see that there are different social classes around the world that are booming. In China, there's been an economic boom in the last 15 years, although there has been a slowdown as of late, especially given the unfortunate coronavirus occurring right now. But an economic boom is rapidly creating a middle class of more than 130 million people. Analysts project it'll grow to about 400 million in the next 10 years or so. But again, there really has been a recent slowdown even before the coronavirus. That isn't to say that the middle class is still not doing well, it is, but it's difficult to get everyone, to get all citizens in China into the middle class. Japan is highly brand conscious society where upscale designer labels are incredibly popular, although the devastation from the 2011 tsunami really did reduce the demand for luxury goods among many Japanese. There is nothing like a recession or a natural disaster to quell citizens' thirst for luxury goods. The Middle East. The Middle East is interesting. Right now, few Arab women work. That is slowly changing due to revisions in laws, and recently more and more Arab women, in fact, are driving now as a result of changes in the laws over there. This makes a search for latest in Western luxury brands a major leisure activity for those with money. And I suspect as more females go to work, there will be dual income households. And when two people are working, I suspect luxury goods are more accessible and very well may take off. And that's usually an indicator of a growing middle class. The United Kingdom. England is extremely class conscious, and at least until recently, really inherited position and family background, and that really did determine who you were, what you were consuming, what you were about. With India, we do have a booming economy, but again, there's been a slowdown with the coronavirus currently, but affluent consumers prize higher-end global brands. And so, even though about half of India's population lives on about, $1.25 a day or less, you can imagine that especially in developing countries or countries, that have an expanding middle class, luxury goods are really a quick way to separate yourself from people. It's so easy. Oh my gosh, it's so easy. If you're making money in the Middle East or in India and you're really looking to separate yourself, an Armani Exchange bag, a Fendi bag, a BMW car, whatever it might be, can really quickly separate you. Whereas here in the States, especially in the tri-state area, a lot of people have those goods, right, in comparison to India. And so people have to do other things to kind of separate themselves. Buying bigger houses, owning boats, whatever it might be, owning small planes. People go further here, to really distinguish themselves when it comes to luxury. We determine our luxury and what we really should be doing, really all based around because leaders are really at the forefront of a lot of this. If we really think about opinion leaders, we think about why we need opinion leaders, we think about people who influence us, we think about PewDiePie, Markiplier. If you guys follow the Jenners or the Kardashians, whoever you follow on social media, everybody's influenced by somebody. Even I'm influenced by people I want to be, people I want to dress like, people I want to sound like. Can I be as well read as that scholar and dress as well as him? I think about those things. And I know that we all think about those things when we're comparing ourselves to other people, whom we hope to be like one day. Well, opinion leaders are the touch point, really the touchstone for companies and for consumers. They're kind of like middlemen and middle women. And so companies use them as sort of a guerrilla marketing strategy. You'll never know that Nintendo is working with Markiplier or PewDiePie, even if they play or test out a video game. It doesn't really have that corporate veneer, right? It doesn't have that sheen. Oh, this is from Nintendo, or oh, this is from Microsoft. They don't really have those things. So, as a result, these opinion leaders can also look like us, right? Markiplier and PewDiePie look like us. They look like gamers. And so homophily really refers to the degree in which a pair of individuals is similar in terms of education, higher status, and beliefs, or social status for that matter. Effective opinion leaders also tend to be slightly higher in terms of status and educational attainment than those they influence. But it's not so high to be, a difference in social rank. Although if you have a medical expert or, a PhD or something, you might have a sizable difference in education. Market maven. These are people who enjoy transmitting marketplace information of all types here. And so that's what influencers do. They serve as opinion leaders to give their opinions on new products, new services, new brands, and things to consume. The social media revolution here, we have quite a few things that we should be considering here. Brand advocates, social networks, and momentum effect and word of mouth. We know the momentum effect is kind of centered around how quickly influencers might influence something, how quickly influencers might publish messages on blogs, friends might share it. And if there's a brand that's well liked and relevant, word of mouth may manifest here and may really energize campaigns surrounding products and services. So they serve as brand advocates, and they're able to leverage social networks that help collect audiences. And so social media revolution has really allowed companies to customize their messages. I could send you a commercial with Leo DiCaprio, and I can give that to Caucasians, I can give that to African Americans and Asian Americans and blah, blah, blah. And that's the traditional way of doing things. But with this social media revolution, we can see the kinds of customers that might follow Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and ask him to post on Instagram, which, by the way, will cost you $1 million. Yes, you heard me right. He has so many followers, I think close to 100 million, if I'm not mistaken, or 50 million, that companies who want him to post about, a car or coffee or soap or whatever, pay at least $1 million. And so for that customized message, right, for him to use it during a workout or whatever it may be. Finally, there is violence in video gameplay, and this is something that is interesting to consider when we're thinking about the marketplace, when we're thinking about subcultures. There are numerous violent video games, but there are numerous studies that have illustrated that playing violent video games do not spur people toward violence. Now, some people might say that there might be some social learning at stake here, and that it teaches us to get involved in violence. But studies have illustrated that this really is not the case as we move along here. And this really summarizes subcultures and sex roles. And so I hope through this lecture we've seen different ways in which we can parse and cut and cluster and create consumer segments here to really better understand audiences and to get a sense of who is playing what.